1. The hospital that calls you back. I used to explore abandoned places for fun, urban spelunking they call it, old factories, shut down malls, even a church once, but I'll never forget the night we broke into St. Mercy's Asylum. The place had been closed for decades, its doors welded shut. But some local kids had busted open a back entrance, so my friends and I slipped in just after dusk. The air was stale, reeking of mildew and something metallic, like rust or blood. The hallways were lined with rusted wheelchairs, the walls peeling like dead skin. Then the noises started. At first, it was just a distant clicking sound, like someone tapping on a typewriter deep within the asylum. Then came the footsteps, echoing from different hallways at once. One of my friends, Darren, swore he saw a shadow dart past a doorway. We laughed it off, until we found the patient files. They were stacked on a reception desk, untouched by time. I flipped one open and froze. The name at the top was mine, my date of birth, my address. A black and white photo of me staring blankly at the camera, my eyes looking too sunken, my mouth slightly open like I had just started to scream. I looked at the others. Their faces were pale. They held files too, each one with their own names. Then the intercom crackled to life with a burst of static. A voice, mechanical, flat, eerily familiar, spoke, "Welcome back, patients. Your beds are ready." The lights flickered. The exit doors slammed shut. A gurney rolled from the darkness, its wheels screeching, straps hanging open like eager arms. And then, from deep in the asylum, we heard something heavy running toward us. 2. The house that watches. I inherited a house no one in my family spoke about. A distant uncle had lived there alone until he vanished. There was no funeral, no obituary, just silence. When the deed arrived in my name, I asked my mother about it. She went pale and muttered, "Just don't go there." I went anyway. It was old, a looming Victorian with sagging gables and windows like blind, watching eyes. As I stepped onto the porch, the wood groaned beneath me, like something inside was stirring. The key barely worked in the rusted lock, but the moment I pushed open the door, it swung inward on its own, as if it had been waiting. Inside, the house breathed. The walls crackled. The air felt too thick, almost like stepping underwater. The windows were covered, curtains drawn so tight that not even a sliver of moonlight slipped through. But the worst part? Every door was locked from the inside. That first night, I barely slept. I kept hearing shuffling footsteps just outside my bedroom door, though I was alone. The second night, I woke up gasping. There was a sound right next to my ear, a low, wet breathing, like something was leaning in close. Morning came, and I found something new, a notebook on the desk filled with frantic, looping handwriting. The last owner's words. "Don't look in the mirrors. Don't turn around if you hear breathing. Never sleep in the bedroom at the end of the hall." I swallowed hard. My room was at the end of the hall. That night I disobeyed every rule. I uncovered a mirror in the hallway. My reflection was wrong, the head tilted just a little too far, the eyes too hollow. I stepped back, but it stayed there, watching me even after I walked away. I heard breathing again, this time a voice whispering my name right behind me. My stomach clenched. I turned, and that's when I saw it. A figure, gaunt and long-limbed, crawling out of the bedroom on all fours, mouth hanging open in an endless, soundless scream. Its skin was the color of rotten parchment. Its eyes, they were mine. 3. The church that sings deep in the woods, past a road that no longer appeared on any map, we found St. Gideon's Chapel. No one knew who had built it, or why it had been abandoned. The bell tower had collapsed decades ago, the stained glass shattered, but the air inside smelled of fresh incense. And then, there was the music. A low, humming choir so faint it seemed to seep from the walls. We searched for speakers, for any explanation, but the chapel was empty, except for the figures sitting in the pews. At first I thought they were statues, But then I noticed the slow rise and fall of their chests, dozens of them wrapped in black veils, hands folded in silent prayer. They didn't move, didn't breathe loudly. I swallowed hard. "Hey," I whispered. As one, they turned their heads toward me. A shudder ran through my spine. I expected eyes beneath the veils, but there were none. Just emptiness, dark voids where faces should have been. The organ in the corner played a single discordant note, though no one was there. Then the choir sang, louder now. The walls trembled, the floor creaked, and I realized something horrific. The voices weren't coming from their mouths. The sound was pouring from the walls, from the ceiling, from the rotting wood beneath our feet. The figures stood. Their veils floated upward, moving like underwater fabric, revealing nothing underneath, just yawning, grinning spaces where faces should be. The pews shifted, closing the aisle behind us. The chapel was swallowing us whole. The door was gone, and when I turned back, the congregation was already reaching for us. The school that never closed. We dared each other to spend the night at Ashwood Academy, the abandoned school where, decades ago, a classroom of children burned to death. The town refused to tear it down. People claimed the school was still occupied. We slipped in through a broken window. The inside was frozen in time. Desks overturned, books left open on yellowed pages, half-erased equations still smudged on the chalkboard. The air smelled of charred wood and something sharper, like burnt hair. Then the school bell rang. My stomach dropped. There was no electricity. The intercom crackled to life, a voice speaking in a thin, warbling tone, almost like an old tape recording. "All students, please return to your seats." We turned. The desks were full. At first, we thought it was a trick of the dark, but as our flashlights trembled over the seats, we saw them. Blackened, skeletal figures, slumped forward, fingers curled into ruined desks. Their eyes were gone, melted away by the fire. Their mouths hung open, frozen mid-scream. Then they moved. Slowly, their heads creaked upward, bones grinding. One by one, they turned toward us. A girl in the front row lifted a burned, bony hand and pointed, right at me. "You're late." The classroom door slammed shut. The chalkboard began writing on its own, screeching letters carving deep into the surface. "Detained." My flashlight flickered. The skeletal children stood, and then the lights went out.